Well, if you're a regular viewer, you'll know that in the middle of parliamentary terms, I tend to be pretty dismissive of polls. I think there's too much focus on polls. But when it's this close to the election, the polls and the analysis of the polls, well, I reckon it really, really matters. And there was some more Newspoll analysis in The Australian this morning, which shows that both major parties have an issue with support among women. Here's how Sky News reported the numbers.
Labor's primary vote amongst women has dropped to 29%. Support for the Greens has climbed by 2 points to 15. The number of women supporting Labor has dropped by 7% since the last election. The data indicates female voters also have a negative view of Peter Dutton. Despite Mr Dutton's lack of support, the coalition leads Labor in the female vote on two-party preferred, 51 to 49.
Let's get into this and some other aspects of the polling with the expert number cruncher and former Labor Senator John Black joining us from Brisbane. John, I suppose this polling won't surprise everyone. People have talked about a women problem, especially for the coalition, but the fact that it's hitting both major parties, what do you make of that?
Look, the fertility rate in Australia has dropped like a stone in the last 3 or 4 years, and the facts are that there are more younger women without kids, and they tend to vote more for the left, particularly for the Greens. So that's, I think, is the major explanation of what we're seeing here. But both the major parties are on the nose with their supporters, whether they're male or female, Chris.
Yeah, I'll come back to that in a second, because that's very important, that the major parties being on the nose, and you've written about that today. But back to that point about demographics, that's so important to get our heads around. I mean, you're saying when women are married or become mothers, are partnered up and become parents, then their political outlook changes. It's the same for blokes, presumably. They become more conservative. But as young free spirits, they're left wing. And that's what we're seeing play out.
This has been happening for quite some time. If the act of getting married and having kids, or partnering up and having kids, makes you a lot more conservative. Chris, you acquire a house, you acquire responsibilities with kids. You've got to feed the little guys. You've got a mortgage to pay. You've got to commute to 2 jobs. You need 2 jobs to make ends meet. So you become much more concerned about the economy, and you become much more likely to vote for the Conservatives. As fertility's dropped, as it has, as I said, like a stone since COVID, it's now down to about 1.5, then there are more people who are footloose and fancy-free, and as I said, they're much more inclined to vote for the Greens. So I think that explains a lot of what we're seeing. But at the same time, the Greens have been losing votes amongst their older and former supporters, of course, as they learn how to add up, Chris. Yeah, now we can see how we can see how Labor's tackling this. Labor are having a big focus on women, and they pitch their Medicare advertising fairly strongly at women. I think we're going to see a big focus on women in their budget tomorrow. What do the coalition and Peter Dutton need to do, especially when his popularity or lack of it stands out in the cohort of women? Well, these voters are not only becoming more conservative, they're becoming more volatile. So hence the largesse from the Labor Party towards childcare, for example, which is a big impost on this particular demographic. As they move into having kids, then they lose an income, and they need childcare to secure 2 incomes. So it's a point at which people are really volatile, particularly females. So yes, they're throwing money at that. As to what the coalition needs to do, well, Chris, that's up to them. But you can keep on saying "me too" for a while before people start to get a little bit bored with what you're offering, and we're seeing signs of that now. So whatever they're going to do, I mean, the way to increase productivity, obviously, is to treat the cost of childcare the same way that blokes treat the cost of a new Hilux ute, mate. It's a tax deduction. So that would be another obvious thing for people to look at. Yeah, you're singing my song. I've said that for a decade or more. Forget all the regulation and subsidies of childcare. Just make it a tax-deductible expense. But I think they figure that's too expensive and too laissez-faire.
Let's go to your analysis that's kind of depressing to read for someone like me, and that is because you're saying that this drift away from the major parties is continuing. That means we're going to get this hodgepodge of independents and minor parties. The reason I hate that is because I think it leads to terrible government. But you're saying the winner of this election is going to be the major party that the mob distrust the least. They distrust both of them, so it's sort of a race to the bottom, you're saying.
Well, yeah, look, the facts are that a few years back, 20 years back, around about 80, I think, out of 150 seats were being determined on primary votes. So, the major parties were the major parties, in fact, not just name. Now we're seeing that now down to, I think, about 15 seats as at the last election in 2022. Labor won only 8 out of the 78 seats it now holds on primary votes. Now, these are the seats where we're seeing from all of the research the biggest swings against the Labor Party. So on the evidence from all of the extrapolation of these polls on individual seats, the Labor Party will not win a single seat on primary votes at the next election.
Wow.
Now, I don't like that one little bit for democracy, as apart from being an old Labor bloke, I don't like it one little bit there either. But similarly, the coalition, Chris, they look like winning only 3 out of the current 55 odd seats that they've got. So they're in a similar position. That is not healthy for democracy. And the evidence is that the Greens are suffering from a loss of their primary support. So some of those votes are spraying across to the coalition, some to Labor, some are going from Labor to the Greens, and some are going off to the coalition. As I said, some of the Teals also are coming back to coalition voters in some of their safer seats. So I think it's fair to say that the poor old mug punters aren't happy, not just with the major parties, but also with the minor parties.
Wow, it's going to be messy. It makes me want to start a conversation about getting rid of compulsory voting, about having optional preferential voting, about first past the post, all those other options. We'll take those up with you another time, though, John. Thanks so much for joining us.